All right, guys, let's get started, okay? So, right. Medical school interview seminar. I'm a second-year medical student at the Mayo Clinic. I'm Kevin. My name is Kevin. I interviewed, well, I was a reapplicant to medical school. I got it on my second try. And the first time I got 2 interviews. The second time I got many, many more. Now, I've done all sorts of interviews from MMIs to panel interviews to oddball, group interviews. Okay, so if you have any questions, about the US interview cycle, just let me know, all right? It's both Canadian and US schools. So today's focus is on it's not an MMI, but it's like, on the interview preparation. If you want access to our other recordings on Casper or whatever, just send us a text. By the way, we're gonna send you slides, so don't bother writing stuff down. We're gonna send you slides at the end. We'll show you how to access them in the recording, okay? So just chill out and just grab a coffee, grab a tea, and learn. If you joined us in our session an hour ago, you don't have to attend this. You can just attend at 9 for our ethics webinar, okay? So the secret to the interview is the title of this presentation. And here's the thing, okay? In these interviews, you're gonna be asked, hot topic questions, right? So maybe directly, maybe indirectly, but you should have an awareness of things like the opioid epidemic, homelessness, barriers to care, social determinants of health, Indigenous health. If these things are foreign to you, it's time to look all these concepts up and start getting some sort of schema, some framework about them, okay? But here's the thing. People infatuate, they use the wrong word. In my opinion, people use the wrong word. They infatuate about medical ethics. I have done, I forgot what the number said, but almost 15 medical school interviews, US, Canada, Ontario, Quebec, New York, Florida, name it, right? I've never had, or maybe once, I've had a medical ethics question, okay? The thing is, I can't even remember. I don't think I've ever received a medical ethics question. Because what is medical ethics that everybody is just infatuated with? It's the beneficence, non-maleficence, that kind of stuff, right? Obviously, some questions. Okay, let me correct what you guys mean. What you should be looking up instead of medical ethics should be communication. What you guys think is ethics is actually communication. It's communication style questions. For example, there's someone who does not want to give their child the measles vaccine, right? They read something online that it can cause autism, something of that sort, and now you have to communicate with them. Is this ethic? Is this beneficence? Not. If you start speaking like that, you can. You sound, robotic. It sounds ridiculous. I don't think anybody I know who got into med school would just start spitting out, all those 4 pillars. The exception is autonomy and informed decision making. Obviously, you want to give people information so they can make an informed decision, and you want to allow people to make their own decisions. You don't want to force people to do something. But in terms of reading a 400-page book on pure medical ethics, I've never been asked about organ donation. Okay, people are infatuated with organ donation. I need to know the correct ethical guidelines for organ donation. Or I've never even been asked about medical assistance in dying, right? You should have a good gist of what's going on, okay? And we will actually give you 20 high yields. We're gonna have a high yield review of ethics, but it's more so hot topics in an hour. If you guys wanna join that, it's at 9 p.m. Eastern time. But I've never been asked about a Jehovah's Witness. People are infatuated, Jehovah's Witness questions. You should know what to say if a Jehovah's Witness person comes in. Guys, if you crave learning about these things, go ahead. I've never been asked. It's mostly been, some real issue that's going on in Ontario. It's kind of current, and my opinion on it. So, okay, pay attention to these topics. These are medically related topics. Okay, and you guys, you have a panel. I'm not going to bore you with this. Okay, you guys know your format of your interview. I'm not going to bore you. But here's the key. The second, because I reapplied to med school, I interviewed twice. The second time, not only would I have opinions on the former stuff I showed you, but I would also have a good opinions on stuff that aren't really medically related. For instance, the housing crisis in Ontario. climate change, international medical graduates versus Canadian medical graduates, mid-level providers. Okay, what is a mid-level provider? Well, it's not a politically correct term. It's not the right term to use, but it refers to nurse practitioners, physician assistants, basically people who are not medical doctors, but they're getting an increasingly large scope of autonomous practice. They can, prescribe stuff by themselves and so on and so forth. This is key because look, in Ontario last year, a law was passed that pharmacists can now prescribe up to 11 different medications without you having to go to your family doctor, so that you can just go to the pharmacist and they can just prescribe it to you. I think like antihistamines and some other stuff like that. I don't think antibiotics are part of those 11. Okay. So what do you think of this, right? Oh, you should probably know that this exists, right? Like we're doing this because this is directly relevant to the physician shortage, because there's a shortage of primary care providers in Ontario, in Canada, in the world. And if you can have some of their busy work, oh, you need an antihistamine, here you go. If you can just delegate that to pharmacists or some other scope of practice, it can be beneficial for our healthcare field. But some people say, hey, these are not medically trained people. They didn't go through medical school and residency, so they should not have an increased scope of practice. Recent bills, physician burnout, cancel culture. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked about cancel culture in my interviews. It was more of a hot topic when I was interviewing like 3 years ago, but cancel culture, wealth gap. So I had an interview, I'm not going to say which school, at a Canadian school, where they showed me a picture of the world, like a map of the world, and the wealth of different countries. And they just asked me, what do you think about this? So obviously, I didn't have any clue. Not obviously, I didn't have any clue what I thought about that, or I didn't have a coherent answer because it was very weird to me, that question. And I didn't get into that medical school. But I'm putting it here for you now that, hey, you might be asked about the wealth gap. Because if you really think of it, all these things, even if they're not directly medically related, they affect the population in a very real manner. And it becomes a matter of public health. And I feel like these interviews, a lot of it is like public health, like public health. How can we as a province do this? What do you think about this? How do we communicate this? How do we battle misinformation? A lot of it is public health, guys. Public health, okay? It's not medical ethics in the strict term. It's public health, it's communication. And when you're in that panel style interview, you could very well have like a communication style question. I've had this in Canadian interviews, I've had this in American interviews many times, where it's like, hey, the person across from you is like your friend who doesn't want to take the COVID vaccine because their family says this or that, and they're going to be kicked off, I don't know, the basketball team. Now you talk to them, right? So if you guys want tips on how to do those communication questions, just like let me know at the end in the Q&A. But you see, like, you should be ready for anything and everything, and I encourage you to think broadly. Sorry, organ donation should not be here. I just talked about that. But aging population is another big one. Okay, so guys, let's do some practice together. By the way, to those who's joined, we're going to send you these slides, so don't bother like taking notes. We're going to show you at the end how to get these slides. Imagine you're a physician and encounter a patient with chronic pain who requests opioid medication. How would you balance the need for effective pain management with the risk of opioid addiction? All right, think about your answer for this while I get a water, okay? All right, I hope you guys thought that one through. Let's look at an answer to this question. I would have, okay, let's answer this. I would conduct a comprehensive assessment of the patient's pain. I would have conversation with the patient about their pain experience and treatment history. If opioids are necessary, I would pursue caution, starting at the lowest dose to avoid dependence. I would revise the treatment plan with the patient periodically, which means I'd regularly review it and adjust as needed. And lastly, I'd give a conclusion. What do you guys think about this answer? Put in the chat, what do you think about this answer? And I promise you, I won't go to the next slide until someone in the chat says, hey, I think it's a good answer or it's a bad answer. Or you can unmute. Ali said it's a good answer. Do people agree with Ali? Do people agree with Ali? No one else? Come on, guys. Who agrees with Ali? Yilin, you know what, Ali? Let me say something to you. I agree with you. This is a good answer. And Yilin, I agree with you too. So here's the thing. This is a good answer, guys. But is there a framework that can be used for all different scenarios? Natalie, please ask me at the end. I have a very good opinion on that. So this is a great answer. If I told you a medical professional gave this answer, would you guys believe me? I mean, there's no reason to not believe me, right? It's like, I told you a medical professional gave this answer. Why would you not believe me? It's a very solid, mature answer and addresses everything. So this is the sort of answer I would have given the first cycle that I interviewed, okay? But remember, I didn't get in any schools on my first cycle. Let's look at what I started doing in my second cycle, where I got into a bunch of schools, okay? So we're gonna give the same answer. I would have given the same answer to this opioid question, but then I would have also added something like this. I could first explore a multidisciplinary approach to treating pain, for instance, physiotherapy, lifestyle modifications, exercise, diet. I would educate the patient about the risks of opioid use and how we can minimize these risks to build a trusting doctor-patient relationship. Maybe you can make connections to the opioid crisis, okay? Every major metropolitan center across Canada is dealing with an opioid crisis. Maybe you could talk about certain interesting cases that are well studied, like this topic, about sickle cell disease and racism with respect to opioids. So there's populations that are disproportionately have a disproportionately high prevalence of sickle cell trait or sickle cell disease. It's usually the Black African American populations. Like, you guys aren't American anyways, the African populations. So they might come to the emergency room in excruciating pain because they have sickle cell trait or disease that has not been diagnosed. And then they might, be like, oh man, I need some opioids, right? Understandably. But then the emergency physician might be like, oh, well, this person just wants opioids, right? And there's an aspect of, there's this whole topic that's been studied in relation to that. You could discuss specific medical cases relevant to Canada, Ontario. You could briefly talk about the science of opioid addiction, right? Perhaps take a course on cell biology, cell signaling, the mu receptor, sensitization, so on and so forth. I wouldn't spend too much time on this. Okay, maybe like a 20-second just like point about how addiction works. Or maybe you've done some volunteering, like some street medicine volunteering. Maybe you've administered naloxone, or you've been trained on naloxone, or maybe you did research in the field. You see how there's many interesting ways to make connections beyond just giving a solid answer. You guys see the difference? Like, put in the chat if you see a difference. Also put in the chat if you have questions, okay? All right. Yeah, Natalie sees it, yeah. So that question came from our question bank on opioid crisis. So this is what our website used to look like back when we had like, I think just over 100 questions. That's what our website looks like now. We have over 300 questions. So this is when you log into thebrightdoctor.com, you see our medical school interview question bank. Just so if you guys go on, I don't want you to get confused. This is from our opioid crisis mini question bank. So 5 questions specific to the opioid crisis, okay? And the reason people love our website, I mean, we have over 13,000 users now across the US and Canada, is because we give, just like you saw, answers to these questions, tips to go beyond, and red flags to avoid, okay, for over 300 questions. Jivy, ask me that at the end, okay? I'm going to go over that at the end. I just want to make sure I get through all these slides. But I hear you guys. Okay, standing out, let me just... Why do you need to give extraordinary answers, okay? Why can't you just give that great answer? It's because around 40% of people, I mean, that's like rough. At a given school, it's around 35 to 50% of people get in. Okay, I'm including waitlist movement. I'm including waitlist people. So imagine you're interviewing at a school like Western, where everybody has a good GPA, everybody met like MCAT cutoffs. Your activities are stellar, outstanding. You've put in all this hard work. You're not competing against random people. You're competing against the cream of the crop. So unfortunately, this means that you're going to have to find ways to stand out against the people you interview against. Okay. And I mean, this is like the way I see things is everybody's doing the same thing. So I was like, okay, if I do the same thing, I'm just leaving it up to luck, whether I get it or not, right? Everybody's reading, doing right. Everybody's listening to the same podcast. Do I think Doing Right is a good book? It's a phenomenal book for medical ethics. And like I said at the beginning of this presentation, you're not asked about medical ethics. You're not asked about beneficence, non-maleficence, justice. You're not asked these things. You're asked communication style questions. You're asked about hot topics, okay? So obviously, I'm going to just repeat because a bunch of people have joined. Obviously, you're going to talk about autonomy and informed decision-making, but those are literally the two things out of like the whole framework of like medical ethics that I would repeatedly use. I never had a question about organ donation. I never had a question about Jehovah's Witness. I've never had a question about, who should be prioritized in terms of like, who should we ask if someone's dying and they're not mentally competent? Like, I've never had questions that are specifically medical ethics. Would I brush up on, the pillars of medical ethics? Yeah. Would I read a 400-page book on it? I don't see the use in that, okay? You guys can, we're going to show you how to get the recording at the end. You can see what I said. I spoke about this for like 5 minutes at the beginning. So what are the ways that you can stand out against other applicants? And this is the most important slide of the entire deck, okay? Again, we're going to send these slides, so don't bother taking notes. But I've distilled it down to 5 ways, okay? You're going to stand out either by addressing more perspectives than other people, so maybe demonstrate some interesting knowledge. You offer more alternative solutions, or perhaps creative solutions, or how to avoid certain issues in the future. You're a better speaker than other people. You're more personable. You have more organized answers, less ums and ahs, and you speak with confidence by looking at the camera. You make connections to your personal life, to your future career, or you demonstrate some specific domain knowledge. And lastly, you explain why, okay? So a lot of people in these interviews, if they're asked like a policy question, how do you think we should tackle misinformation, okay? They're gonna give like 200 cool ideas, like, oh, we can make a website, we can make an app, blah, 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 blah. But it's like, why? Like, explain why, explain your rationale, explain the thinking behind, instead of just listing 100 cool ideas, we should use SpaceX satellites to, tell people that are in the North Pole. Like, guys, if you're gonna give a crazy idea, just explain why. And my job in this presentation is to show you how to do all 5 of these things. And we've already shown you a few of them, like making connections with specific domain knowledge in terms of that opioid crisis question we just did. Okay. And I bolted this point because everybody knows a smart aleck. This is someone who always speaks like they know what they're talking about, even though many times they don't. These people will make it pretty far in a medical school interview because they can look at a camera again and speak with confidence. Okay. Are there any questions? All right, so everybody who's joined, we're going to send you slides at the end. You guys missed a lot of really juicy stuff about answering like opioid addiction questions, okay? And like how to go from a great answer to an extraordinary answer. We're gonna send you this along with the link to the recording. Just stay to the end and we'll show you how to access that, okay? Are there any questions for me for now? Yeah, okay. Jibby, I'll answer that at the end. By the way, I know a lot of people like to pay medical students for prep, like through these big companies that charge you $300-400 an hour. We have a platform called Admission Peer, okay? It's called Admission Peer, where we have a lot of medical students from all over US and Canada. I'm just going to the Canadians. A lot of them on the last page because I'm in the US right now. So we have medical students, Queens, McMaster, a lot, U of T, and they charge like $40-50 an hour instead of like $300 an hour. Also, we have a competitor in the space, like in terms of booking medical students. I want to just tell you guys that we let you pay in Canadian dollars for their packages, so you can just click Canadian dollars. All right. We don't charge tax, and we don't have a booking fee. So you can basically Yeah, we don't have a booking fee. I mean, it's as simple as that. We don't charge you like some silly fee every time that you book a consultant. Okay, so you can check it out at admissioncareer.com or thebrightdoc.com/marketplace. And we have lots of medical students. I mean, look, yellow, that's not a medical student, but anyways, lots of people for you guys. Okay, so no tax, paying CAD, 0 platform fee. And by the way, if you sign up by tonight, we'll give you $10 Canadian off your first session. 10 Canadian dollars off your first session. All right. Should you speak for the full time? So because it's a panel interview, don't ramble for too long. I wouldn't ramble more than 2 to 3 minutes on, if you're asked one of these two questions, if you're asked like, tell me about yourself, or why do you want to be a doctor, have answers for those. Limit them to like 2.5 minutes, 3 tops, because then you're rambling. I think even 3 minutes is rambling. People say 4 minutes. If I were to talk to you, if you asked me a question and I spoke to you for 4 minutes, you'd be like, what the hell? Like, are you gonna stop talking? Like, what's going on, man? What about the panel? So here's the thing. If there's follow-up, right? When there's because people, they can ask you follow-up questions, okay? So if you're in a context where you're speaking to someone on Zoom, they can ask you follow-up questions. This is brilliant because in my experience in my interviews, when I stop talking early, if I miss something that was on their checklist, like, does this guy talk about this? They will ask me a follow-up question, like, oh, but what do you think about this? Oh, don't you think this could do this? Or like blah, blah, blah. And they'll kind of help you get points. They'll help you get points. And you need that, guys. Okay, if you're gonna ramble, you're not gonna be able to get those points. Okay, so like for example, McMaster is 8 minutes. I'm not gonna talk for 8 minutes. I talk for like max 3 or 4, because that one's like 8 minutes. And then I just let them ask me follow-up questions. Boom, boom, boom. And then it gets to a funny point where they kind of run out of, because they have 3 follow-up questions they can ask you. They can keep going down, right? So, and then it's like, oh, we just talked about random stuff. And it's like, oh, I just made a pretty interesting connection with my interview. Should you go in depth or broad? Yeah, so I'd say discuss 1 or 2 topics deeply, but acknowledge other ideas either beforehand or towards the end. All right, let's do another practice question together, okay? How does the Ontario healthcare system address the needs of Indigenous populations, and what improvements can be made? By the way, a lot of people love asking me in these webinars. No, McMaster is synchronous, and you have someone staring at you. You just go through rooms. It's an MMI. At least when I interviewed there twice, and I got in. Okay, so a lot of people ask me the question, Kevin, but I'm not Indigenous. So how can I go beyond? How can I make a personal connection if I'm asked about the Indigenous population? And if you ask me that, I have a very phenomenal answer. Just ask me at the end in the Q&A, and I'll give you my answer. Because there's a very many ways you can make it personable and make a unique answer. But let's look at this. So how can the Ontario healthcare system address the needs? So we're going to start off with an introduction. The Ontario healthcare system has made efforts to address the unique healthcare needs of Indigenous populations, though there are still significant areas for improvement. Okay, this is what I call an organizing statement, because it tells your interviewer that, hey, first you're going to talk about what Ontario has done, and then you're going to get to the areas for improvement. Okay, one way the system addresses these needs is through culturally sensitive care. So this involves providing healthcare services that respect and incorporate Indigenous cultural practices, beliefs, and values. For instance, some healthcare facilities in Ontario have integrated traditional healing practices alongside conventional medical treatments. So we're literally showing, hey, this is what Ontario is doing. So guys, what does this tell me, okay? What does this tell me? Some healthcare facilities in Ontario have like a holistic approach to medicine. It tells me, as your interviewer, if I'm your interviewer, that you have been in the healthcare system. You have either volunteered, you have interacted with these communities, and you've learned about resources that exist for these communities. Did you have to go and brag about your activities? No, but simply through your answer, you're hinting at a lot of depth of involvement in the Ontario healthcare system. The Ontario government has also made efforts to improve access to healthcare for Indigenous communities. This includes funding for programs and services specifically designed for Indigenous populations, such as the Aboriginal Health Access Centers, which offer a range of health and wellness services. Boom, again, you're showing that, hey, I have been in the healthcare system. I understand our healthcare system. I'm not just someone where my parents forced me to become a doctor yesterday and they forced me to apply to medical school. No, I'm interested and I understand what we have to offer for these underserved populations. However, there are still notable gaps and challenges. One major issue is the accessibility of services, especially for those in remote or rural Indigenous communities, which lack healthcare facilities and professionals, leading to disparities. Another area for improvement is the training and education of healthcare professionals in Indigenous health. There's been some progress made, but there's a need for more comprehensive mandatory training on cultural competence and understanding the historical and social factors that impact the health of Indigenous peoples. Huge. In Ontario, you should look it up. The historical factors that have either put Indigenous populations now in a worse state in terms of their social alternative to health, or have created medical mistrust. I'm going to talk about that on the next slide, okay? So we acknowledge this. We've answered the question now, okay? We've answered the question. Now look what's going to happen. Furthermore, there's a need for greater involvement of Indigenous communities in the planning and delivery of healthcare services. This can be achieved through more meaningful partnerships and collaboration with Indigenous leaders and organizations, ensuring that healthcare initiatives are community-driven and responsive to their specific needs. Wow. Not only do you answer the question about what Ontario is doing, what improvements can be made, but you offer a solution. And not only that, those of you who are very, very astute scholars of the CanMEDS roles will notice that what I talked about here is actually shared decision-making. Wow, shared decision-making. Does that ring a bell? Of course it does. It's one of the CanMEDS pillars, right? Did I use the words shared decision-making? No, but simply through going beyond offering a solution and a very mature answer, I've incorporated the concept of shared decision-making into my answer, like, hey, we're making policies that are affecting the Indigenous peoples. Why don't we get the leaders of the communities in the decision-making room with us to influence the outcomes? Because, hey, this is the best way to do things, and this is a CanMEDS rules. Natalie, I try not to use buzzwords not because it's a bad word, shared decision-making. I personally am superstitious in that I think if I use buzzwords that everybody else uses, I'm going to sound like everybody else, okay? So I'm saying the exact same stuff. I'm going beyond and offering, then I go beyond and offer a solution, and my solution incorporates those concepts in the underpinning of my answer incorporates all those CanMEDS rules. Like you see here, shared decision-making, but I don't use the word shared decision-making, right? I don't use, it's the same thing with ethics. I'm not going to say, oh, we should think about the pillar of non-maleficence and how we can, a physician should not do harm. I'm not going to talk like that. What are you saying, man? No one talks like that. Anyways, you know who talks like that? You know who talks like that? People who do PhDs in biomedical ethics. Is that you guys? No. Again, if you just joined, I made a point. This isn't ethics. This is like hot topics, communication style questions, and so on. So again, this answer comes from our website. We have tips to go beyond, red flags to avoid. Okay, don't overlook the historical context of Indigenous health disparities, including the impact of colonization in residential schools. So boom, Canada, residential schools, right? We discovered those mass graves recently. I think it was a year or two ago. And then you should also know about forced sterilizations, okay? So in Canada, you should know that this is a big cause of medical distrust in the Indigenous communities is forced sterilizations, right? Why would you trust the Canadian medical system when some people came and injected a needle in you that made you sterile? So there's a lot of stuff to talk about and many, many ways to go beyond, okay? I have some pointers about how to answer personal questions, but are there any questions from you for now? Would you signpost? What does signposting mean? I've never heard of this word. What does it mean to signpost? So I interviewed at many schools across different provinces. Western was not one of them. But when would you signpost? Okay, I'll say X, Y, Z. Yeah, I would. I have an organizing sentence. I'm going to show you how to do that. I want to try to do that, okay? But I've had many panel interviews. Ottawa, McGill, so on and so forth. So what's the biggest challenge that you overcome? Okay, let's look at how to answer personal questions. So when you go to a personal question, you want to use the STAR method, okay? So situation, task, action, result. So let's answer this. Last semester in the McMaster Biology Society, while organizing a programming skills workshop for first year students, we encountered an unexpected vendor cancellation, leaving us without crucial materials. I was tasked with swiftly finding a replacement vendor without overshooting our budget. Consequently, I quickly researched alternative suppliers, assessed their offerings against our needs, and strategically approached the most promising ones to renegotiate terms suitable for our budget. I used strategies like calling suppliers instead of email to ensure rapid communication. Ultimately, we secured the necessary materials under budget, and the workshop went on without a hitch. A and the R, by the way, people love in these personal questions. Okay, first things first, look at the CanMeds roles. Have 2 to 3 stories from your life for each of the roles, okay? I like to use the American list. It's a little more extensive, I think, but you can use CanMeds. And you want to integrate that into the A and the R, because this is where you get your points, guys. You get your points here. You don't get points for having a crazy situation. Like, oh, okay, obviously this isn't a big challenge, but I was curing cancer in Trudeau's office, okay? It doesn't matter how grandiose of a situation you make up. Where you get your points is in the action and in the results section, okay? But here's the thing. Everybody knows the STAR method. I don't know anyone who knows the START method. I think there's a missing letter, and it stands for takeaway. So for all my stories, the second time that I interviewed, because again, I was a re-applicant to medical school the second time where I got a bunch of interviews across different provinces and states, I would have takeaways for my personal stories. So I would give them the same solid answer, but then I'd say, okay, as I pursue a career in medicine, I will continue to draw on such skills to stay collected in rapidly changing situations. Through strong communication skills, along with problem solving, I'll continue to ensure team needs are met for the benefit of my future patients. Wow, right? Wow, because not only do I give them what they want, which is an answer, a very well-organized answer, in fact, right? But I show that I've reflected on this personal story from my life, and not only have I reflected on it and thought of what I took away from it, but then I connected it to my future as a medical student or medicine. It doesn't get more mature and impactful than this. Like this is phenomenal. Make sure all your personal stories have a takeaway, and I love connecting it to my future profession. Okay, that's my favorite thing. I'd have a different takeaway for every type of question, like conflict resolution. I'd say, okay, I would do X, Y, Z. But then at the end, I'd say, as I pursue a career in medicine, these conflict resolution skills will be very helpful to me as I work in multidisciplinary teams with people from all walks of life to provide holistic team-based care for my patients. Beautiful, right? Beautiful. I mean, that sentence was so beautiful. You guys should probably steal it from me because I don't interview at medical schools anymore. Personal questions. Yeah, so have 2 to 3 stories from your life ready for each type of pillar that reflect your values, that perhaps have a takeaway, that reflect the CanMeds roles, okay? And guys, like, you should really, I just spent 3 days, my interview prep was just thinking of personal stories from my life and just writing them down, the main bullet points from those stories, and practicing saying those stories so I don't forget parts of it. And it helped me a lot on my interview day, okay? But I wouldn't over practice them to the point where I'm saying a robotic script. That's why specifically I'd have bullet points. But here's the thing, the medical school, wow, no one thinks of this in Canada. The reason I did this is because I interviewed in the US many times before I did in Canada, right? So those who join, I'm a medical student at the Mayo Clinic in the US. So in the US, top applicants will get like 30, they'll apply to 30 schools. They'll get interviews at like 15 schools, and they'll get into like 8 schools, okay? It is what it is. So if you're interviewing at 15 schools, the schools know that you're a top applicant, and they want to know, well, why do you want to come here, right? Why do you want to come to our school? Why should we accept you? Because if you don't come here, and that's going to make our stats look bad. It's going to make it look like no one wants to come here or something. It apparently affects the rankings or something. So in Canada, unfortunately, there's so few schools that you're lucky to get into any school. So the medical school doesn't ask you. In fact, actually, that's a lie. I've been asked once. I'm not going to say the school. I've been asked once, why do you want to come here? But they rarely ask you, why do you want to come to this medical school? So no one researches their medical schools. They're just like, they research for some reason medical ethics. But yeah, research the heck out of the medical school. I'm gonna give you 2 examples why. Okay, example number one. Imagine I'm interviewing at McMaster, and they ask me a question. Oh, how do you think we should encourage more? Encourage better stewardship of antimicrobials, of antibiotic medications to address antimicrobial resistance, right? So I can give an answer on this hot topic, a very solid answer, whatnot. I know we should track, we should have a system for monitoring antibiotics. We should send more notifications to people's phones, make sure they're taking their antibiotics on time so resistance doesn't develop, so on and so forth, right? But imagine at the end, I say this. I say, by the way, I know that at McMaster on the 3rd floor of MDCL, your MDCL building, you have the Antibiotic Discovery Lab, which is the foremost pioneering antibiotic research facility in Canada. I don't know if it's the number 1, but it's one of the top 3 in Canada, like antimicrobial resistance. I'm not making this up. This lab exists. Imagine I say that, and I say, as a medical student, I would love to contribute to research there. Wow. I mean, this will blow them away, guys. This will blow them away. Every interview, because I researched the heck out of the schools, I would have at least one question somewhere where I was able to mention my knowledge of something the school offers. And that goes a long way, in my opinion. It goes a long way. Here's another example. People who love asking me, oh, Kevin, for example, I'm not this population, I'm not that population. How do I talk about it? Well, imagine you did your due diligence on the medical school that you claim you want to go to for the next 4 years, and you researched all their opportunities, and now you could be like, oh, well, you give an answer, for example, on the Indigenous population question, and then you'll be like, by the way, I know that Western has several electives where I can go to, these community hospitals that are in rural places in Ontario, where I'll be able to actually interact with these populations and learn firsthand how to better treat them. I mean, guys, this is like, it's simple to do. Go on the website, click every link, click every tab, see everything they offer, reach out to a medical student there, just see like what they think of it, and have interesting things, because I guarantee you, especially if you have multiple interviews, there's going to be some place somehow. You don't have to like make a point of it, but you will be asked the question where you're like, oh yeah, I can actually say this at the end, that like they have something relevant to this, and I would love to join that as a medical student. Guys, this is like a top tier game. No one does this in Canada, so if I were you, I'd do it. Again, it's about standing out. Okay, I have pro tips. Any quick questions before pro tips, and then I have a Q&A at the end. Okay. Organization. So the person who asked the organization question, if it was like a policy question, then I'd be like, oh yeah, I want to say hello, obviously, in the middle of the panel, but I'd say, all right, I'll begin by addressing the pros and cons of implementing such a public health policy, for giving my opinion, and then relating it to an experience I've had in the area, right? So I would preface it with some sort of organizing question, just to help them follow the order of my thoughts. Otherwise, it's rambling. Whether or not you're rambling, it sounds like rambling when you don't give them like a table of contents to your answer. And furthermore, when you do that, it helps you not ramble and go on tangents, because you're like, you can't tell them you're going to do this and then in the middle talk about your experience and then finally give your opinion. It's just not going to make sense for yourself. So it helps you, it helps them. Okay, avoid extreme stances. A lot of people say, Kevin, I prepared this hard for my interview. Why would I go say some crazy stuff on my interview? Well, it's not that simple. This is because a lot of people are very polarized, right? They're very polarized in one way or another. So imagine you're asked this: should pharmaceutical companies be allowed to provide gifts, such as free samples for their latest medicinal compounds to physicians? Most people I know would say no. No, pharma companies, evil, right? They're evil. Or they say it on their head, and then they say, oh, this is like conflict of interest, and no. Well, imagine, instead of just saying no and conflict of interest and just being one-sided, What if you talked about this? Imagine you're a family doctor and you have a patient who can't afford a medication, and you prescribe medication to them, and you're like, oh yeah, by the way, I have like a box of this stuff for free. Here you go. Here's one. Here's like a bottle. And you just give it to them. Well, this is pretty cool because in Canada, you don't have free drugs. You don't have free pharmaceutical compounds because you have free medical care at point of service. You don't have, if you need antibiotics or something, you have to pay for that out of pocket. Whether or not you have insurance from your parents or some government program, maybe you do, but still you're paying out of pocket for that. The government does not usually pay for your prescription medications. So imagine that you can do this. Well, that's pretty good. In fact, this happened to me. I was at a family doctor's office. I was diagnosed with GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease, so acid reflux. It turns out I didn't have acid reflux. Turns out I didn't have anything. But my doctor just said, hey, you need a proton pump inhibitor. You need omeprazole, right? So you make less stomach acid. By the way, I have like 3 boxes of this stuff. This company keeps like shipping them, like just giving me free like boxes of this. Here you go. So boom, I was a student. I didn't really have money. So, I mean, I'm still a student paying big tuition. That helped me a lot. It's like I don't have to go spend like $15 on this. I can go spend that on lunch. Do you see how that's beneficial? Or what about this? What if the pharmaceutical company is a big part of your local economy? So in Toronto, for those of you who are from Toronto, at Keel and Steeles, I think, Keel and Steeles, you have, do those even intersect? I think they do. Yeah, Keel and Steeles, you have Sanofi Pasteur, which is a big company. I think it's a French company that makes vaccines. So imagine there's like a big, Dufferin and Steeles, okay. There's like a big, law. There's like a law preventing the sort of interaction between pharma companies and physicians, and now your local pharma company that's a big part of your local economy goes like bankrupt. Okay, well that's pretty bad. Now people are going to get laid off, and it's going to impact the local economy and so on and so forth. Do you need to agree with this statement? No, you don't have to. You can still say that you don't agree, that you think it's a conflict of interest, but just mentioning the other side and the most evil person, giving them the benefit of the doubt, just talking about 1 or 2 pros will go a long way in showing the maturity of your thought. Okay, does this make sense, guys? Did I enlighten you, or am I being very redundant? Someone put in the chat, was this a useful discussion? Was this useful to anybody? Yes, okay, good. Thank you. Okay, sweet. Study at night. So guys, like, when I was a teenager, I read this book that said whatever you do 45 minutes before you sleep gets replayed in your head up to 6 times more than anything else you do during the day. So that's why if you watch like a horror movie at night, you're going to get a nightmare usually. But if you watch it in the morning, like first thing I wake up, I watch a horror movie, then I go about my day, you're probably not going to get a nightmare, okay? So I don't know how true that number is, 6 times more, but I believe it. It's why cramming the night before a test, isn't the worst. I would always prep for my interview throughout the day, but especially at night, so the perspective-taking mindset would become ingrained in my brain. Okay, forget this. Share videos of your answers with colleagues. Let me show you what I mean by this. So if we just go to library here, these are our question banks. So we have the medical school interview question bank. Again, we have the Ontario Health Policy with 30 questions specific to Ontario. Click this. So, okay, 10 questions remain. Let's just reset. If you go to, we have 10 free questions, guys. Go on test mode. Okay, create. Begin. Okay, how does Ontario's healthcare system support palliative care and end-of-life services, and what improvements can be made? Guys, we go in deep on like cool parts of the healthcare system for you guys to know about Ontario. So begin response. Boom, 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 boom. I'm going to give an amazing answer, okay? I'm going to give a very cool answer. And I'm going to click finish. You can save this video, review these videos, send them to your friends, see if you're talking too fast, moving your hands too much while you're looking at the camera, and so on and so forth. And again, we have real-time research answers for you guys. Like one key initiative is the Ontario Palliative Care Network, right? So we have real-time research answers to save you guys literally hundreds of hours of studying, and like cool links that you can follow, especially for our policy stuff. So yeah, that's our question banks, and specifically that was one of the mini banks on provincial health policy. And again, the key is practice, practice, practice. You should have a good foundation, be able to provide an opinion, deliver an opinion on a very wide range of topics. Okay, so this is why people, we have over 13,000 users now. People love this our website. Last year we had a little over 100 questions. Now we have over 330 questions. We save you. People say, okay, well, I could Google answers to these questions. Well, yeah, you can, but that's literally what we're trying to save you from doing. Is you don't have to spend 50, 100, 150 hours just getting to the point of like having like some understanding of these things, when you can have them all in one place with expert answers, research done for you, and tips to go beyond. So you can spend the rest of your time while everybody else is like still researching. Oh, wow, what's that law about pharmacy? About pharmacists in Ontario and how they can prescribe different medications. And they're just discovering this stuff. You've already studied like much more than them. And let me show you this. Let's reset progress here. For personal questions, guys, the only way you're going to know if you don't have a personal story is if you do a lot of personal questions. Okay. For example, if I ask you guys right now, name a time you disagreed with a supervisor or a person of authority. Most of you, I guarantee 90% of you would trip out right now. Would just trip out. Like, name a time you disagreed with a supervisor. Well, I'm not supposed to disagree with supervisors. Oh, and then you have to make up some fake story, or just, I don't know what happens on your exam or on your interview. So do a lot of questions, personal story, and you're going to see which ones you're missing, okay? A great test. How would your mother describe you? How about your friends? I've been asked this in my interviews. Name a time you're disagreed with the authority figure. I think I've been asked that in a Canadian interview as well, the one I just said. So yeah, how would your mother describe you? View answer. And we have, for these personal stock questions, we purchased a lot of answers from medical students who've been accepted, so you can see different perspectives on these questions. So what's your biggest regret? So we have several for these. Describe yourself in 3 words. Like, we have 3 answers for this. So you can see how different medical students are answering these questions. And again, we still have the go beyond, red flags to avoid, and so on and so forth. Okay. So for joining this webinar, oh, by the way, we're going to have a high yield health like policy and ethics review at 9 p.m. So 9 minutes. And this is like a preview. We're going to be talking about all this stuff. Okay. If you want to join, just hop on in 9 minutes. Okay. As part of joining this, our presentation, we're going to give you a $10 US credit gift voucher, or whatever it is, for use with our question banks. So this will apply to monthly and yearly memberships. All right. So again, we have 13,000 users right now across the US and Canada. And if you guys, here's some like pro game, okay? Here's some really good game. If you use this, don't only look at Ontario, okay? Because you could be asked some sort of healthcare policy. Imagine if you could also talk about, oh yeah, this is how British Columbia is doing things. This is how Alberta is doing things. This is how Quebec's doing things. Boom. Or if you're really a gunner, if you're really studying hard for this, I would actually look at American health policy. I wouldn't study it in depth. I wouldn't make Anki cards on it, right? I wouldn't make Anki cards on it. You guys say like Anki. But I would study this. I would just like breeze through these questions, reading the answers, because privatization of healthcare is huge as like a hot topic in Ontario. And imagine it's like, oh, by the way, this is how Alberta's doing things. And oh yeah, well, the best example of privatization is the United States. This is what's going on there. This is how outcomes are going for them, and so on and so forth. So you could really give some very awesome answers if you're asked about privatization or some sort of health policy where America's doing things differently, okay? And again, we have our hot topics and so on and so forth to literally save you what can be hundreds of hours of your time, so you can spend that becoming a better communicator instead of just learning the basics of like, the social determinants of health or Ontario health policy, you can spend that time getting ahead of other people who are interviewing. And if you sign up by tonight, we will send you a $10 Canadian voucher to take off your first consultation with on admission here if you want to talk to the medical students here. So we have a lot of Canadian medical students. There's much more. You just have to go through them. But it's U of P, U of T Ottawa, and you can get $10 off your first one. Okay. So yeah, we'll send you a code very soon. Now Q&A. Are there any questions for me for the next 6 minutes before we go into ethics? Yeah, just sign up by tonight, guys, to get the slides, to get the credit vouchers. And this webinar is going to be posted to past webinars right here. These are all free to check out, okay? You can check these all out for free. You don't have to pay. And it'll be just like down here or something. Oh, yeah. So frameworks for situational. Okay, Natalie, if you have to leave at 9, please email us and we'll send you the slides, okay? Jibby says framework for situational questions. So I don't usually, what do you mean by situational question? Like you're not talking about policy, right? You're talking about like what you would do. Yeah, I'm a little removed from that, but I hate to give you a non-answer, but it's actually not. We had a Casper summit where I went over that. I forgot the specifics of how I said I approached it. But I literally go over that in like the first 30 minutes. We had a Casper summit where I presented on this. Because situational things, it's usually like, are you talking about communication? Like maybe there's like someone who doesn't want to give a vaccine to their kid. Do you want to do that as an example or no? Do you mean communication, like talking to somebody or? Yeah, just sign up for our website and we're going to send it to your email, Andrea. Okay, so for questions that are like communicating with someone one-on-one, make sure you can continually assess understanding, okay? You assess their, like, oh, like, does this make sense? Do you need me to repeat anything? Do you have any questions? Be very nice. I had like the vaccine one, like someone doesn't want to get a vaccine. The first thing is like not trying to tell them to do something, but just exploring why. Oh, what do you think? Oh, what have you heard about this vaccine? And so on and so forth. And then you try to really make a connection with them because usually they're like your friend or something, or they're like a patient. And that's how you approach it. And then you have to, towards the end, like mention like the scientific knowledge you have or some sort of knowledge you have on vaccination, the efficacy of vaccines, side effect profile, like so, and then help them make an informed decision. Again, we go over this in the next session at 9 p.m. It's also in our vaccine ethics question bank. It's about assessing understanding continually. And I'm going to, at our next session at 9 p.m., I'm going to show you a very good framework for talking to people if you're given like, oh, you have to go talk to this person right now, one-on-one, and like convince them to, I don't know, stop smoking or something. I'm going to show you a really good framework for that at our 9 p.m. session. Sadie asks, have you ever had them role play? Yeah, I was talking about role play right now. That's exactly what I'm talking about, role play. So I'm going to, at the 9 p.m. session, I'm going to tell you how to go through like role play style questions towards the end. Okay, and I want to get to that thing where people are like, oh, Kevin, I'm not Indigenous. Well, how do I make, how do I say something interesting? Or I'm not, a woman, or I'm not a man, or I'm not this or that, right? How do I connect to that, the men's mental health crisis? Well, I'm a woman. Oh, well, how do I connect to the Black population? Well, here's the thing. Okay, let's go for the example with the Indigenous population. Imagine you give a very solid, mature answer to a question you're asked, and then to go beyond, you can mention research that you've done, maybe with Indigenous populations, clubs you've been part of, volunteering you've done, maybe you've interacted with with individuals from certain tribes, courses that you've taken, right? And again, you maybe research the medical school, about opportunities they offer. For me, I think I was asked a question, and I did a study abroad, so like an exchange in the US. And one thing I did during my study abroad, because I got like a little bit of funding for it, was go to Arizona and like there was like a museum, like a native tribes museum, like the Navajo peoples, and I learned that some of them live 60 miles, which is like 100 kilometers away from their nearest high school. So a lot of them never finish high school because what are you going to do? Are you going to help your parents, like, make some money and survive and do things that are important to you? Or are you going to go drive 100 kilometers to this high school and then 100 kilometers back? I mean, your whole day's gone. So I was able to mention this, right? Am I an Indigenous person to Canadian lands? No, I'm an immigrant from Asia, right? So you see how there's like many interesting ways to just show off your knowledge, show off your experiences, and the fact that you care and are willing to learn more. Does that make sense, y'all? I got to dip in like 2 minutes. Let's see one last question. Restriction to access to the past webinars? No, there's no restriction to access. These are all free. All right, y'all. Are there any? If there's no more questions, I mean, if you have more questions, join us at our ethics seminar, which is going to start. I mean, it's starting right now, so I'm going to hop into that. That's where we're going to do the high yield ethics or health policy review. My pleasure, y'all. If you want the link to that, it's go on at the Bright Doc on Instagram, and we have the link to that, I think. Or let me just find the link to that for you guys. I'm just gonna paste it in the chat if you want to join me at 9, okay? I'm gonna paste the link in the chat. If you want to join me at 9. Okay. My pleasure, Melina, Mariam, Fatima. Good luck, guys. Good luck, everybody. I wish everybody the very best of luck. Natalie.